Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hey, Derek, do me a favor. Would you go to the back and just get a cocktail napkin? Yes. Thanks. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much for coming today. September 1st, is it? I don't know how you feel. I feel pretty good today. I got a good night's sleep last night. Slept like a lawyer. You know how a lawyer sleeps? First you lie on one side, then you lie on the other. That was in Herb Cain today. I thought it was cute. I was a lawyer once, and I decided to go into business. And that was about 10 years ago, 1977, spring of 1977. And it's been about 10 years since our company went into business, and this has been one of the most interesting, one of the most difficult, and one of the most exciting periods in our company history. So I thought it would be good if we got together today to talk about where we have been, how we got there, and where we seem to be going. Before launching into that, let me just mention a few things that are interesting. One is the promotion of Charlotte Van to manager of telemarketing, which you know about, and she has done a super job, and I want to thank her for that. Some new people who you may not know as well, Glenn Atwood. Glenn, would you just look at everybody, maybe stand up so they can see your face, is our new manager of real estate. And Tom Greenhaw, where's Tom? Right there, is manager of our corporate accounts, premium and incentive sales. And we hope this is going to be a very exciting new area for us. So Tom has joined the marketing department as the manager of that. And Jim Foster, who has been around a while, right there, is manager of quality assurance. And we can use that. He'll be working with the products to make sure that the products are up to the standards that we expect. So 10 years ago, a little over 10 years really, April 1977, we began with a magazine ad. And that seems like a small beginning, and it was just 5 years ago that we had one retail store. And it was just 3 years ago that we had 4 retail stores. In 1984, well, 3.5 years ago. So it seems hard to believe that today as we sit here, now we have over 50 retail stores. Some other milestones have been passed. It was about 2 years ago that we passed 100 million in sales. And for a company that only began in April 1977, that was a tremendous accomplishment. This year, we will hit 200 million of sales. So that in itself is it's a fantastic accomplishment. And we have successful catalogs in Germany and Switzerland, very successful. And we have our first store in Osaka, Japan, and we have a Japanese catalog. And someday we'll probably have stores in other European cities and probably in Canada. And we have seen really what you would have to say is extraordinary growth and achievement over this 10 years. And growth really has created the opportunity that has been the SHRP image for all of us. It's created a lot of responsibility for different people. It's created our salaries, obviously. It's created the offices that we work in and what we do every day, the people we work with. It's created bonuses, and it's created, more importantly than anything, the opportunity to grow in the future. And we have grown fairly consistently. You know, our sales have grown almost every single year for the 10 years we've been in business. I don't think there's a single year when the sales didn't grow. I think one year they grew very little, but every year they grew from the first day we went into business. And the profits grew almost every year. Not always, but almost every year the profits grew. And that's probably the nature of growth. That growth goes in fits and starts, and sometimes it grows more rapidly and sometimes it grows more slowly. It's interesting if you think about the fact that in the last 9 months, or if you want to generalize more broadly, in the last year, we have had the highest levels of accomplishment, the highest highs in this company that we have ever had. And we've also had some of the lowest lows that we've ever had. Last December, or last January to be exact, we finished our 4th quarter of the fiscal year, which was last year, calendar 1987. And we finished the best 4th quarter and the best year that we had ever had in the history of our company, by far. Our sales were up 30%. To 161 million, and the profits were up 70%. It was incredible to be up 70%, and the number per share was 70 cents a share. That was an amazing accomplishment. It was the highest we'd ever done in our lives, and we didn't report that until about last March, 6 months ago. So it was just 6 months ago that we were patting ourselves on the back and saying we had done the best we had ever done in our lives, and the best this company has ever done in its corporate history. And it was just 3 months after that that we sunk to one of the lowest lows, because we then reported the biggest quarterly loss in our company's history. And we followed it up the next quarter, the 2nd quarter of the current year, 1988 calendar year, by reporting the 2nd biggest quarterly loss we had ever had. So you have to marvel at the fact that we've had really the highest high in our company's history and two of the lowest lows. Now let's put the lows in perspective. We are still expecting that this year will be the second most profitable year in our history, which is interesting in itself. I mean, we are a company that is still very profitable, and we are expecting to report the second best year we've ever had in earnings and the very best year we've ever had in sales. So we need to put these things a little bit in perspective. Our stock price for a moment, if we can talk about that. We've hit the highest highs and the lowest lows there. It was just a year and 3 months ago that we went public, sold our shares to the public for the first time, and hit the highest high in our stock, 10 7/8. And it was just this morning that we hit the lowest low in 9 months, 5. So it's hard to believe that all in 14 months we could have our highest and our lowest. I want to take a time out for a moment, if I can, and talk about some of the basic terms that I want us all to learn about for today and for the future, because I think that the better we all understand them, the better that we can manage our business to get the result we want. So I'm going to just take a moment, if I can, and digress here for just a second. Let's just talk about a few of these terms. Shares, very quickly. Shares are simply the unit that we use to talk about the ownership of the company. In our company, we have 8 million shares, and different people own different amounts. But no one really owns the company. They just own a piece of the company by owning a share. We all know sort of what a share is. And it's usually evidenced by a certificate. The owners are the people that own the shares, okay? The owners own those pieces of paper called shares. The managers are the people who actually run the company. And that is pretty much the people in this room plus the managers out in our retail store group. The regional managers, the district managers, and the store managers. But other than the company managers we have here, and other than the store managers, that is the management of this company. Sometimes the owners are also the managers. In our case, we have a fairly widespread ownership among managers. Everybody in this room either has shares they own right now because they bought them a long time ago, or they have options to own shares, or if they're brand new with us, they will be given options to own shares. The options, by the way, we've talked about before, but let's just reiterate. An option is a right to own shares. The nice thing about that is it doesn't cost you anything to have the option, and you only need to use the option if it's worth something. If it's worth something, then use it. If it's not worth something, leave it in the drawer. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. Where the people that own shares, probably they paid for them. And if it goes down to zero, they'll be sorry that they ever bought them. So in a way, an option's better than owning shares because the option doesn't cost anything. It can only be a positive. It can never be a negative. But actually owning a share, it could be a negative if it ever dropped below what you paid for it. And there may be people right here who have already bought shares at a higher price than what it is today. So there's owners and there's managers, and in our company, a lot of the owners are managers, and a lot of the managers are owners. I might just mention, it's sort of interesting to notice that the percentage of ownership is different. The people in our company, the managers in our company, and some supervisors, and a few others, I think, own about 5% of our total shares, or have options on up to 5% of the total. The public, people that were offered shares last April, a year and 2 months ago, a year and 3 months ago, or that have bought since then, that is about 15% of the total shares. 15%. I own about 70% still, and there are other people who own a little percent here or there. But basically, it's the managers of the company, me, and the 15% that's the public, the people that buy and sell every day that shows up in the Wall Street Journal. A few other quick terms. Earnings. Earnings are simply the total earnings of the company divided by those 8 million shares. So last year we earned about $5.5 million divided by 8 million shares. Comes out to exactly 70 cents per share, 5.6 million. And they always talk about earnings per share. They never talk about the total because they trade the shares every day. They don't trade the company as a whole. They just trade the individual shares. So they always compute everything on a per share basis. That is earnings per share. And ours were 70 cents last year. And then the other term that's sort of interesting, two other terms, is expense, because when you talk about income, the subject of expense often comes up. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And then the last term I want to discuss, and then we'll get on with this presentation, is what they use to compute the price of the stock. Because the price is not arbitrary. I mean, it is arbitrary in the sense that it goes up and down, but there's some logic behind why the price is what it is every day. And generally it's based on a ratio, like a lot of things in life. And the name of the ratio is the price-earnings ratio. In other words, they take the earnings that we've reported, say 70 cents last year, and they apply a ratio to it. And that generally comes up with the price. It's that simple. And what ratio they apply varies dramatically from company to company. When I say who they are, I'm talking about the 15% that own it in the public. It's interesting, every day a few hundred shares trade in the Wall Street Journal, or are reported to trade in the Wall Street Journal, or a few thousand shares some days, and some days even 50,000 shares. But the interesting thing is there's about 1.2, 1.25 million shares in public hands. And every day a few thousand of those trade. And those few thousand people set the price for everybody else. For all the people that haven't traded that day, for me, I own 70% of the company, and they set my price every day. And they set your price. And the majority of us never traded a share. We didn't even quote a price. And yet they are setting the price every day. This few people, it may only be 10 people a day that actually buy and sell some. They're the ones that set the price. They don't really mean to, it's just they're the only ones that are reported. So whatever price they buy or sell at, that's what's printed in the journal every day, and that's the price. It's sort of like owning a house. And you read that your neighbor sold his house for a certain price, so you assume your house is worth about the same. Now you may think your house is different than his and should have some different ratios applied to it, but there are some general parameters that hold for everybody. And in this business, in the stock business, the price-earnings ratio is a commonly used ratio. And historically, that number has been around 15. If you look at the history of Wall Street for the last 40 years, 15 is the number that comes up a lot. They take our earnings of 70 cents a share, they would multiply it by traditionally 15 and come up with $10.50. They would say the SHRP image should trade at $10.50. Today it was at 5, however. Now, sometimes a company is very highly regarded, and they give it a much higher multiple. I just checked the journal yesterday and wrote down a few. Like Walmart, the famous discounter that you've all heard of. Walmart is a discounter out of Arkansas, and they've had a tremendous history for 20 years. They traded 30 times earnings. So if our stock was valued at a multiple of 30, we would take 70 cents times 30 is $21. They would trade our stock at $21. If they gave us the same multiple as Williams-Sonoma, a local company, a very fine mail order and retail company, well-managed, long-term company, that is valued at 25 times earnings. And if our stock was valued at 25 times earnings, we would be trading at 17. 70 cents times 25. But we're not. We're trading at 5. The gap, which got to astronomical heights, it got as high as something like 50 times earnings last August before the crash. Even today, as we sit here, is still trading at 20 times earnings. And if we were trading at 20 times earnings, our stock would be 14. However, we are trading at a price of 5, which is 8 times earnings, which I might point out is one of the lowest in the retail industry, if not absolutely in the basement. Now, why are we at 5 and Walmart's at 30 and Williams-Sonoma is at 25? That is a very important question. And the reason it's so important is that it really reflects two things. It reflects the consistency of earnings of our company. That is, the likelihood the earnings will continue to be consistent in the future. And it reflects the professionalism of our management. And I don't want you to think that I'm only concerned about the stock price, so I want to relate that for a moment, this issue of earnings, to a larger issue, which is growth. And I want you to think for a moment about the fact that we have grown over the years from this zero size company 11 years ago to a $200 million company today because of the fact that our earnings grew. It was the earnings that said what we were doing was successful. I mean, that was the confirmation in monetary terms that our catalog was working, that our product choices were working, that our stores were working. And it was the